Racist cops arrest black woman, shocked when she's the judge. The bustling city street was alive with the hum of traffic and the chatter of pedestrians. Amidst the commotion, two white police officers stood next to a sleek black car with tinted windows. Their faces were hard, eyes narrowed, fixed on the driver, a black woman in her 30s, dressed in a tailored suit, her demeanor calm but unyielding. Well, what do we have here? Another one thinking she's above the law, one of the officers muttered, his lips curling into a smirk. His partner leaned in closer, his voice dripping with condescension as he demanded license and registration. Now. The woman remained composed, her movements deliberate as she reached into her designer handbag. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying an air of authority that didn't quite match the officer's expectations. "I'm complying, officer. May I know the reason for this stop?" The first officer scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest, his posture deliberately intimidating. "You match the description of a suspect. Dark skin, fancy car. Looks suspicious to me." A small crowd began to gather nearby, some passers-by raising their smartphones, recording the scene. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. "Another stop and frisk. This is racial profiling," one bystander whispered. "She's so calm." "Who is she?" another asked, curiosity tinged with concern. Without warning, the second officer yanked open the car door, his grip rough as he grabbed the woman's arm. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." She complied, her expression unchanged, her eyes focused and unblinking. The first officer shoved her against the car, his hands moving aggressively as he searched her bag. His movements were rough, unnecessarily forceful. Empty. No drugs, no weapons. Just fancy lawyer stuff. He pulled out a sleek leather-bound notebook and tossed it onto the hood dismissively. It flipped open, revealing neatly organized court documents. At the bottom of one page was a signature, bold and authoritative, Judge Camille Johnson. But the officers didn't notice. They continued their search, their smug arrogance showing in every movement. One of them leaned close, his voice mocking, "People like you think you're above the law. Guess you're not so special after all." The woman stayed silent, her head held high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. As they roughly cuffed her hands behind her back, she looked directly at the first officer, her gaze steady, unwavering. "You'll see me again, sooner than you think." The officers exchanged confused glances before dismissing her words with a sneer. "Yeah, sure. In your dreams," the first one laughed as he shoved her into the patrol car. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing down the street. The crowd stood in stunned silence as the patrol car sped away, leaving her luxury vehicle abandoned on the curb. A breeze lifted the pages of her notebook, fluttering the court documents with her name on them, the title Judge Camille Johnson visible for a fleeting moment before the wind carried them away. The street resumed its busy rhythm, but an unsettling chill lingered, the murmurs of injustice hanging in the air. The video of the arrest spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was plastered across social media, news sites, and television screens. Hashtags demanding justice flooded Twitter, and the clip of Camille's calm, dignified stance against the aggressive officers became a symbol of strength and resistance. "Did you see that?" one anchor asked, replaying the footage. "She never once lost her composure. She didn't raise her voice, didn't fight back," his co-anchor added. "Yet they treated her like a criminal." In a small, dimly lit office, Officer Turner leaned back in his chair, watching the news coverage with growing irritation. His partner, Harris, paced the room, his jaw clenched, fists tight. "This is getting out of hand," Harris muttered, his eyes glued to the TV. "They're making us look like the bad guys." Turner scoffed, crossing his arms. "Yeah, well, they didn't see how she looked at us. Like she was better than us." Harris stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "She threatened us. You'll see me again, sooner than you think," he repeated, mocking her calm tone. "What the hell did she mean by that?" Turner shrugged, the corners of his mouth curling into a sneer. Probably just trying to scare us. Typical. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through comments under the video, his face tightening with anger at the accusations of racism and abuse of power. She's nobody, Turner insisted, his voice cold. Just another troublemaker. People like her don't matter. Harris looked unconvinced, his mind replaying the scene in his head. There was something about her, something unsettling. The way she stood tall, her voice unwavering, her eyes piercing through them without fear. What if she's somebody important? Harris whispered, almost to himself. But Turner dismissed the thought with a wave of his hand. Doesn't matter. We did our job. Let's just move on. But moving on wouldn't be that easy. Meanwhile, at her home, Camille watched the news coverage in silence. The faces of Turner and Harris appeared on the screen, their smug expressions captured during her arrest. She watched herself, dignified, poised, and unyielding, never breaking eye contact with her accusers. A slight smile played on her lips, a flicker of satisfaction beneath her composed demeanor. They had no idea who she was. No idea what was coming. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with messages of support and outrage from friends, colleagues, and strangers alike. But Camille ignored them, her attention drifting to the leather-bound notebook resting on her coffee table, the same one Turner had carelessly tossed aside. She picked it up, flipping through the pages of court documents, her fingers brushing over her signature, Judge Camille Johnson. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She opened it to find her assistant, Jasmine, her face pale, eyes wide with worry. Judge Johnson, are you okay? Camille's smile widened, her confidence unshaken. I'm fine, Jasmine. Just fine. Jasmine hesitated, her gaze flicking to the TV. I saw the news. I can't believe they did that, to you. They didn't know who I was, Camille replied, her voice calm, almost amused. They thought I was nobody. Just another black woman they could humiliate. Jasmine's eyes hardened with anger. They should pay for this. Oh, they will, Camille said, her tone chillingly calm. They just don't know it yet. She closed the door behind Jasmine, her mind racing through the possibilities. Her position as a judge gave her power, real power. She knew the law inside out. She knew how to play the game better than anyone. And she knew exactly how to make them pay. Back at the precinct, Turner and Harris were summoned to the captain's office. They walked in, feigning confidence, but their bravado wavered as they saw the stern expression on Captain Reynolds' face. He didn't greet them, didn't offer them a seat. Instead, he leaned back, his fingers drumming on the desk as he watched them with cold, calculating eyes. Turner. Harris. Care to explain this? He jabbed a finger at his computer screen, where the video of Camille's arrest played on loop. Turner opened his mouth, but the captain cut him off. Spare me the excuses. Do you have any idea who you arrested? Harris's stomach twisted. Just some woman causing trouble. She was being uncooperative. Captain Reynolds' eyes blazed with fury. That woman is Judge Camille Johnson, the youngest, most respected judge in this district. Turner's face went pale. Harris felt his heart drop, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. The captain continued, his voice low and deadly. She's the judge presiding over the internal affairs cases next month. You know, the ones investigating police misconduct? The blood drained from Turner's face, his cocky demeanor collapsing. And thanks to you two geniuses, Captain Reynolds spat, she now has a first-hand account of how dirty this department is. Harris's knees went weak. Turner's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Captain Reynolds stood up, his face inches from theirs. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've handed her the power to destroy us. The room fell into a cold, suffocating silence. The captain's voice was a low growl. I don't know how, but you're going to fix this. Do you hear me? You're going to fix this, or you're finished. Turner swallowed hard, nodding mechanically. Harris could barely breathe, his mind reeling as the reality of their mistake sank in. They hadn't just arrested a woman. They had arrested a judge. And not just any judge. The judge who now held their fates in her hands. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation. It was a packed room, filled with lawyers, reporters, and curious onlookers who had followed the story from the moment it went viral. The scandal of 2 police officers arresting a black woman without cause was newsworthy enough, but when it was revealed that the woman was Judge Camille Johnson, the youngest and most influential judge in the district, the public's outrage turned into fascination. Whispers filled the room as Turner and Harris sat at the defendant's table, their faces pale, eyes shifting nervously. They had traded their uniforms for ill-fitting suits, their usual bravado replaced by visible anxiety. Turner wiped the sweat off his brow, his fingers trembling. Harris's hands were clenched tightly together, his jaw rigid. "I can't believe this is happening," Turner whispered, his voice hollow. "We're on trial, like criminals." Harris didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the empty judge's seat, his chest tight with dread. He hadn't slept in days, haunted by the memory of Camille's calm, unblinking gaze. It was a look that now made his skin crawl. Suddenly, the room fell silent as the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Camille Johnson." The courtroom gasped in unison as Camille entered, her presence commanding and regal. She wore her judicial robes with grace, her shoulders squared, head held high. Her face was expressionless, a mask of professional detachment, but her eyes were sharp, unwavering as they locked onto Turner and Harris. Their faces went white. Turner's mouth fell open, his body going rigid. Harris felt his knees buckle, gripping the table to keep himself steady. Camille took her seat, adjusting her robes with meticulous precision. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air before she spoke. "You may be seated." Her voice was calm, authoritative, with no trace of emotion. But to Turner and Harris, it felt like a death sentence. They sat down, their bodies stiff, movements mechanical, eyes glued to the table in front of them. Camille opened the case file, her fingers moving methodically, her demeanor coldly professional. "This court will now hear the case of People versus Turner and Harris, charged with misconduct, abuse of power, and racial profiling." The accusations hung in the air like a dark cloud. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing, capturing every tense moment. Turner's hands shook under the table, and Harris's heart raced, his throat tightening. Camille looked up, her gaze piercing through the defendants. The defendants stand accused of unlawful detention and excessive force against an unarmed civilian without probable cause. Her eyes narrowed, her voice steady, controlled. A civilian who, unbeknownst to them, was a sitting judge. Turner's body jerked as if he'd been slapped. Harris's jaw dropped, a strangled sound escaping his throat. Camille's gaze never wavered, her eyes cold, calculating. "I will hear from the prosecution." The prosecutor stood, confident and composed, his voice clear and assertive. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Body camera footage shows the defendant's clear racial bias, unjustified arrest, and excessive use of force. Additionally, the defendants fabricated charges to justify their actions." The prosecutor played the body cam footage, and the courtroom watched in stunned silence. The recording played back every degrading word, every unnecessary shove, every sneer and smirk. It showed Turner and Harris mocking Camille, dehumanizing her, treating her as less than human. On the screen, Camille's calm, dignified face appeared, her posture unyielding even as they manhandled her. The same face now looked down upon them from the judge's seat, her expression unreadable. The footage continued, showing Turner's sneer as he dismissed her questions, Harris's cruel grip on her arm, the way they threw her belongings around like trash. And finally, it played Camille's prophetic words, "You'll see me again, sooner than you think." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom, eyes widening as they looked from the screen to the woman on the bench. The realization was like a shockwave. She had known. She had known exactly what she was doing, even then. Camille's face remained impassive, her eyes never leaving Turner and Harris. They looked sick, faces flushed with humiliation, sweat beading on their foreheads. The prosecutor's voice cut through the murmurs. The defendants' actions were not just unprofessional, they were unlawful. They violated the civil rights of Judge Camille Johnson, assuming she was a criminal based solely on the color of her skin. His words echoed through the room, heavy and damning. The defense lawyer rose, his face pale, his voice shaky. "Your Honor, my clients, they were unaware of her position. They believed they were acting in the interest of public safety." Camille's eyes flicked to the defense lawyer, her expression hardening. Ignorance of a person's status does not justify abuse of power or racial profiling. If I were not a judge, would your argument then justify their behavior? The defense lawyer's face paled further, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Camille continued, her voice cool and precise. "The issue is not that they did not know who I was. The issue is that they assumed I was a criminal because of my skin color. They saw me not as a person, but as a threat." Her words were sharp, slicing through the air like blades. Turner flinched, his face crumpling. Harris looked down, shame washing over him. Camille's expression remained stony. Their actions reflect a pattern of behavior that has no place in law enforcement or society. Her words landed like punches, relentless and uncompromising. There was no trace of vengeance, only cold, hard justice. "I am not here as their victim. I am here as a judge, to uphold the law. And the law demands accountability." The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with tension. The audience sat motionless, mesmerized by her power, her dignity, her unwavering authority. Camille closed the case file, her posture unyielding, her gaze unwavering. This court will not tolerate abuse of power. Not from civilians, and certainly not from those entrusted to uphold the law. She looked at Turner and Harris, her eyes icy. The defendants are found guilty of misconduct, abuse of power, and racial profiling. Their faces fell, horror and disbelief washing over them. Harris looked ready to collapse. Turner's shoulders sagged, his arrogance shattered. Camille's voice was firm, steady. "Officer Mark Turner and Officer James Harris are hereby sentenced to suspension without pay, mandatory racial bias training, and criminal charges of civil rights violations." Turner let out a strangled cry, his head falling into his hands. Harris's face crumpled, his body trembling. Camille's eyes never wavered. "Justice has been served." She rose, her presence towering, indomitable. "Court is adjourned." As she walked out, the room exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed to the exit, cameras flashing. The crowd murmured, astonished by what they had witnessed. Turner and Harris sat motionless, their careers ruined, their reputations destroyed. The power they once wielded now lay shattered at their feet. And at the center of it all was Camille, a woman who had turned their prejudice into their punishment, who had used her dignity as her weapon, her authority as her shield. She had shown them the true meaning of justice. The courtroom emptied, leaving behind an echo of whispers and hurried footsteps. Turner and Harris sat frozen, staring at the judge's bench where Camille had delivered their verdict. The weight of their guilt pressed down on them, suffocating, inescapable. Outside the courthouse, the streets were alive with protesters, their voices a thunderous roar. Signs reading "Justice for All," "No More Racial Profiling," and "Accountability for Cops" waved in the air. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, eager for a statement from the judge who had just made history. Camille stood at the top of the courthouse steps, her silhouette framed against the sky. Her face was serene, her posture dignified. She looked over the crowd, her expression unwavering as she faced the flashing cameras and raised voices. A reporter broke through the noise, his voice rising above the chaos. "Judge Johnson, how does it feel to preside over the case of your own wrongful arrest?" Camille's gaze didn't falter. She took a deep breath, her words measured, powerful. "This was not about me. This was about justice. This was about holding those in power accountable, regardless of who the victim was." Her voice carried over the crowd, calm yet forceful. As a judge, my duty is to the law, to fairness, and to equality. And today, justice was served. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of emotion surging through the masses. Tears glistened in the eyes of those who saw her as more than a judge, as a symbol of strength, resilience, and hope. Camille looked at the faces before her, black, white, young, old, all united by a shared belief in justice. Her heart swelled with determination. This was just the beginning. Turner and Harris stumbled out of the courthouse, their faces pale, eyes hollow. The crowd's eyes followed them, cold and condemning. Reporters surged towards them, microphones shoved in their faces. "Do you feel any remorse?" one shouted. "Do you regret your actions against Judge Johnson?" another demanded. Turner's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the cameras before he forced himself to speak. We didn't know who she was." A murmur of disgust rippled through the crowd. Harris's face crumpled, his voice breaking. "We were just doing our job. We didn't know." But no one cared about their excuses. The public's anger was palpable, the backlash overwhelming. Their power, their privilege, was gone. They pushed through the crowd, their heads bowed, shame heavy on their shoulders. The world they once controlled was now against them. As they reached the parking lot, Harris leaned against the car, his body shaking. "What are we gonna do? Our careers, they're over." Turner's eyes were wild, desperation twisting his features. "We fight it. We appeal. We can't let her ruin us." Harris looked at him, despair clouding his face. "She's a judge, Turner. She already did." Turner slammed his fist against the car, his anger boiling over. "This isn't fair. She set us up. She knew exactly who we were, and she let us do it." Harris's shoulders slumped. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe she wanted us to show who we really are." Turner fell silent, the weight of Harris's words crashing over him. For the first time, he felt the crushing truth: this wasn't just about their careers. It was about who they were, what they had become. They got into the car, the air heavy with regret and fear. The engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving behind the courthouse, the protesters, and the woman who had dismantled their power with nothing but the truth. Inside her chambers, Camille took off her robe, folding it neatly over the chair. She sat down, her shoulders sinking, exhaustion settling into her bones. The victory was hollow, bittersweet. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Jasmine, her assistant, her eyes shining with admiration. "Judge Johnson, the press is calling you a hero." Camille looked up, her face softening. "I'm not a hero, Jasmine. I'm just doing my job." Jasmine stepped closer, her voice low, sincere. "But it wasn't just a job today. You gave a voice to those who never had one. You showed them that justice isn't just for the powerful." Camille's eyes glistened, a tear escaping before she quickly wiped it away. "I did what needed to be done. It was never about revenge. It was about showing them that they can't abuse their power, no matter who they are." Jasmine's face softened, admiration radiating from her. "You changed everything today. You gave us hope." Camille's shoulders relaxed, a faint smile playing on her lips. Hope. It was a powerful thing. And it was her duty to protect it. "Thank you, Jasmine," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That means more than you know." Jasmine nodded, her eyes brimming with emotion. "You're the kind of judge we need, the kind of judge the world needs." She left the room quietly, the door clicking shut, leaving Camille alone with her thoughts. Camille looked out the window, her eyes drifting over the crowd still gathered outside, the chants of justice echoing in the air. She thought of every injustice she had faced, every time she had been underestimated, every time she had been judged by her skin color before her character. She had turned that pain into power. And she would continue to use that power to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Because justice wasn't just a word. It was a responsibility. Camille stood, her chin high, her spirit unbroken. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the courthouse stood as a symbol, a place where power and privilege had been challenged, where justice had prevailed, where hope had been born anew. And in that moment, Camille knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Several weeks had passed since the verdict, but the shockwaves of Camille's ruling continued to ripple through the community. The headlines were relentless. Judge Camille Johnson brings down corrupt cops. Justice served, racial profiling officers found guilty. A new era of accountability in law enforcement. Camille became a symbol, not just of justice, but of hope. Her face was on every news channel, her story inspiring rallies, speeches, and even reforms in policing policies. Her courtroom had become a place of reckoning, a place where truth prevailed over prejudice. But amidst the accolades and praise, Camille remained grounded, steadfast in her purpose. She didn't fight for fame or recognition. She fought for justice. For those who couldn't fight for themselves. On a cloudy afternoon, Camille stood at the window of her chambers, her gaze distant, lost in thought. A gentle knock on the door broke her reverie. Jasmine peeked inside, her face warm and cheerful. "Judge Johnson, there's someone here to see you." Camille turned, her eyes softening. "Send them in." Jasmine stepped aside, revealing a middle-aged black woman holding the hand of a young boy. Camille's heart skipped a beat as the woman approached, her eyes brimming with tears. The woman's voice trembled as she spoke. "Judge Johnson, I just wanted to thank you." Camille's brow furrowed. "Thank me?" The woman's grip tightened on her son's hand. "I watched what you did, how you stood up against those officers. How you refused to be silenced. My son, he saw it too. And for the first time, he believes he can be anything he wants." The boy looked up at Camille, his eyes wide, filled with admiration. "I want to be a judge, just like you." A lump formed in Camille's throat, her chest tightening with emotion. She knelt down, her eyes level with his, her voice gentle. "You can be anything you want, young man. And don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise." The boy's face lit up, his smile bright and hopeful. Camille stood, her eyes meeting his mother's, a silent understanding passing between them. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for giving him hope, for giving us all hope." Camille's eyes glistened with tears. "Hope is the most powerful thing we have. Hold on to it." The woman nodded, her grip still firm on her son's hand as they turned to leave. Camille watched them go, her heart full, her purpose reaffirmed. That evening, Camille stood at the podium, facing a packed auditorium. Hundreds of faces looked back at her, students, parents, activists, community leaders, all gathered to hear her speak. She took a deep breath, her voice carrying through the room, steady and unwavering. Justice is not just a word. It is an action. It is a responsibility. It is the promise that every person, regardless of their skin color, gender, or status, is equal under the law. The audience erupted in applause, their faces alive with hope and determination. Camille continued, her words powerful, unrelenting. "We must hold those in power accountable. We must demand change. We must stand together, united in our fight for justice." Her voice softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her composed demeanor. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Camille's eyes swept over the audience, her heart swelling with pride, with purpose. She finished, her voice resolute. "The fight for justice never ends. But neither does our courage." The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the auditorium, tears streaming down faces inspired by her strength, her courage, her truth. Camille stepped back, her eyes shimmering with emotion, her spirit unbreakable. The next day, Camille sat at her desk, sifting through letters and emails, messages of gratitude and admiration pouring in from all over the country. But one letter caught her eye, no return address, the handwriting shaky, uncertain. She opened it, her heart skipping a beat as she read. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know, you changed me. You showed me who I really am. And it's not who I want to be. I'm sorry for what I did. For how I treated you. For the pain I caused. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I'm trying to be better. Thank you for showing me the truth. It was signed, James Harris. Camille's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She read the letter again, her mind racing. For a long moment, she sat in silence, the paper trembling in her hands. Slowly, she folded the letter, placing it in her drawer, her fingers lingering on its edge. A tear slipped down her cheek, her chest tight with emotion. Forgiveness wasn't hers to give, but redemption was his to seek. She closed the drawer, her resolve hardening. This was bigger than her. It was about change, real, meaningful change. Camille stood, her shoulders squared, her chin high. There was still work to be done. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Camille stood on the courthouse steps, her gaze drifting over the city. The air was crisp, filled with the hum of life, of hope, of change. She closed her eyes, her heart full, her spirit unyielding. This was her calling. Her fight. Her purpose. And she would never stop fighting for justice. For truth. For hope. Because justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about redemption. And she would be the judge who gave the world both. The days turned into weeks, and the ripple effects of Camille's verdict continued to shape conversations, policies, and lives. Across the country, people were inspired, empowered to challenge injustice and demand accountability. Camille was invited to speak at universities, community centers, and legal conferences, her voice carrying the weight of truth and change. But no matter how far her influence spread, she remained grounded, her purpose unwavering. One evening, Camille sat in her chambers, her desk cluttered with papers, case files, and letters of gratitude. But one envelope caught her eye, plain and unmarked, slipped under her door without ceremony. Her heart tightened as she opened it, her breath catching as she read the short, scribbled note. You may have won this battle, but the war isn't over. Watch your back, Judge. Her fingers tightened around the paper, her jaw clenching. She had expected backlash, anticipated resistance. Change was never easy. It was always met with fear, anger, and threats. She stood up, her eyes steely as she looked out the window at the city she had sworn to protect. The shadows of the night loomed, but Camille's resolve was unbreakable. She would not be intimidated. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Camille arrived at the courthouse to find reporters swarming the steps, their cameras flashing, voices rising in a chaotic symphony. Jasmine rushed to her side, her face tight with worry. Judge Johnson, are you all right? Camille's expression was calm, composed. Yes, Jasmine. Why? Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone vandalized your car. It's too bad. Camille's chest tightened, but she kept her face neutral as she walked to the parking lot. Her car was covered in red spray paint, the words traitor and race traitor scrawled across the hood and windows. For a moment, Camille's composure wavered, her heart pounding in her chest. But she took a deep breath, her face hardening, her resolve sharpening. She turned to Jasmine, her voice firm. Call the police. Have them document everything. And get this cleaned up. Jasmine's eyes were wide, her face pale. Are you sure you're all right? Camille's gaze was cold, unwavering. I'm fine. Just make sure the evidence is preserved. No one intimidates me. She walked back to the courthouse, her back straight, her head high, refusing to let fear control her. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Later that day, Camille sat in her chambers, reviewing a new case when another knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to find Captain Reynolds, his face somber, his posture tense. Judge Johnson, he began, his voice steady but low, I heard about the threats. About the vandalism. Camille's face remained impassive. And? Captain Reynolds took a step closer, his eyes serious. I want you to know, not all of us are like them. Camille's eyes softened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. I never said you were. Reynolds' shoulders relaxed slightly, but his voice remained firm. I'm increasing security around you, both at the courthouse and at your home. You've made powerful enemies, but you've also made powerful allies. Camille studied him, her expression thoughtful. Why are you helping me? Reynolds' gaze didn't waver. Because justice matters. Because you showed me what courage looks like. And because my daughter watched your trial. She saw you stand up to injustice, and for the first time, she told me she wants to be a judge. Camille's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening with emotion. Thank you, Captain. Reynolds nodded, his voice sincere. No, thank you. For showing all of us the truth. He turned to leave, his shoulders squared, his step purposeful. Camille watched him go, her heart heavy but hopeful. Change was happening. Slowly, painfully, but it was happening. That evening, as Camille walked to her car, freshly cleaned and gleaming under the streetlights, she noticed a figure leaning against the hood. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her composure, her face impassive. As she approached, she recognized him, James Harris. He looked different, smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, his face pale and drawn. His eyes were swollen, his hands shaking as he stood up straight, his body rigid with fear and shame. Camille stopped a few feet away, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. What are you doing here? Harris swallowed hard, his voice trembling. I needed to see you. Camille's eyes narrowed. You're not supposed to be here. You're violating your probation. I know, Harris whispered, his face twisting with guilt. But I needed to say. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, raw and heavy. Camille's face remained stoic, her heart pounding in her chest. Harris's eyes filled with tears, his voice cracking. I didn't see you. Not really. All I saw was your skin. I didn't see a person. I didn't see a judge. I didn't see you. His shoulders shook, his face crumpling. I was wrong. And I deserve everything you gave me. But I'm trying to change. I don't want to be that man anymore. Camille's eyes softened, a flicker of pain crossing her face. Why are you telling me this? Harris looked down, his hands trembling. Because I don't deserve your forgiveness. But you deserve to hear the truth. You deserve justice. Camille's throat tightened, her eyes shimmering. She took a deep breath, her voice calm, steady. I never wanted vengeance, Harris. I wanted you to see me. To see us. To see the people you hurt. And to understand why it was wrong. Harris's face crumpled, tears streaming down his face. I see it now. And I'll never stop trying to be better. Camille's eyes softened, her shoulders relaxing. Then you've already started to change. Harris looked up, his eyes wide with shock. You believe that? Camille's voice was gentle, her expression kind. I believe in justice. And justice means giving people the chance to change. Harris's face crumpled, his body shaking with relief and grief. Thank you for giving me that chance. Camille nodded, her voice soft. Don't waste it. Harris looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and shame. I won't. I swear. He turned and walked away, his shoulders still hunched, but his step lighter, his burden a little less heavy. Camille watched him go, her heart aching, her soul weary. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about redemption. And sometimes, it was about forgiveness. She stood there, the cold night air swirling around her, the darkness pressing in. But somewhere in that darkness, there was hope. And Camille knew that she would keep fighting, keep seeking justice, no matter how hard, no matter how dangerous. Because justice wasn't just about the law. It was about truth. It was about change. It was about hope. And as long as she was Judge Camille Johnson, she would fight for it. Every day. Every breath. Every heartbeat. No matter what. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the city as Camille stood at the window of her chambers, her reflection merging with the sprawling urban landscape outside. She watched the world below, people moving like shadows against the glow of streetlights, unaware of the battles fought on their behalf. Her phone buzzed on the desk behind her, breaking the silence. Camille turned, picking it up and seeing the name on the screen, Captain Reynolds. Her heart skipped a beat, a flicker of worry passing through her. "Captain," she answered, her voice steady but alert. His voice was tense, low. "Judge Johnson, we've arrested someone in connection with the threats against you." Camille's grip tightened on the phone. "Who?" There was a pause, the air heavy with anticipation. "It's Turner." A cold chill ran through Camille, her body stiffening. "Turner? But why?" Captain Reynolds' voice was grim. "He couldn't handle the fallout. He lost his job, his pension, everything. Blamed you for it. He's been behind the threats, the vandalism, everything." Camille's chest tightened, anger and sadness swirling inside her. "Where is he now?" "In custody. But there's something you need to see. He left a letter. For you." Camille's heart sank. "A letter?" "Yes. It's disturbing. He was planning something worse. I think he was planning to hurt you." The air left her lungs, her hand trembling. But she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, steadying herself. "I understand. Thank you, Captain. Be careful, Judge Johnson. If he had accomplices, they might still be out there." "I will. And Captain, thank you. For everything." She hung up, her mind racing. Turner's hatred had consumed him, driving him to vengeance, to violence. She had faced many threats before, but this was different. This was personal. Camille sank into her chair, her body heavy with exhaustion. She had fought so hard, for so long, and the cost was starting to wear on her. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, her face lined with worry, her eyes weary. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. She stood up, her shoulders squaring, her chin lifting. She would face this, just as she had faced every other battle in her life. With dignity, with courage, with truth. Because justice wasn't just about the law. It was about standing up to hatred, to prejudice, to violence. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And that was her duty. Her purpose. Her fight. The following morning, Camille entered the courthouse, her face calm, her posture poised. Reporters swarmed around her, their questions loud, relentless. "Judge Johnson, is it true that Officer Turner is behind the threats? Are you afraid for your safety? What will this mean for future cases of police misconduct?" Camille stopped at the top of the steps, turning to face them, her voice clear, unwavering. "Justice is not about fear. It is about truth. I will not be intimidated by threats or violence. I will continue to do my duty, to uphold the law, and to fight for equality." Her words echoed through the courtyard, firm and resolute. We must confront hate with courage. We must face injustice with truth. And we must never back down from doing what is right. The cameras flashed, capturing her strength, her defiance. The reporters fell silent, moved by her conviction, her courage. Camille turned and walked into the courthouse, her head high, her heart steady. She would not be defeated by hatred. She would not bow to fear. She was Judge Camille Johnson. And her fight for justice was far from over. Several months later, the world had changed. The trial of Turner and Harris had set off a chain reaction, sparking national debates on police reform, racial profiling, and justice. Cities across the country began implementing new policies, demanding transparency and accountability from law enforcement. Camille watched it all unfold, her heart swelling with hope. She had become more than a judge. She had become a catalyst for change, a symbol of resilience, courage, and integrity. But she knew her journey was far from over. On a bright, crisp morning, Camille walked up the steps of the courthouse, her head high, her shoulders squared. The air was filled with anticipation, the crowd buzzing as reporters gathered once again, their cameras flashing, voices calling out to her. She paused at the top of the steps, turning to face them. Her face was calm, composed, her gaze steady. A reporter's voice broke through the chaos. "Judge Johnson, after everything you've faced, threats, vandalism, public scrutiny, how do you keep going?" Camille's eyes softened, her voice clear and strong. "Because this is bigger than me. It's about justice. It's about truth. It's about fighting for those who can't fight for themselves." Her words hung in the air, powerful and resolute. Hate tried to silence me. Fear tried to break me. But justice keeps me standing. The crowd fell silent, moved by her conviction, her courage. She turned and walked into the courthouse, her presence commanding, her spirit unbroken. Inside her chambers, Camille found another letter waiting for her. Her heart tightened as she opened it, her breath catching as she read the familiar handwriting. "I'm leaving the city. Starting over. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to be better. I'll carry this guilt for the rest of my life. But because of you, I've learned to see people, to see the truth. Thank you for opening my eyes. James Harris." Camille's eyes glistened with tears, her chest tightening. She folded the letter, placing it in her drawer next to his first apology. She closed it gently, her fingers lingering on the handle. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about letting go of the anger, the pain, the hatred. It was about freeing herself. She took a deep breath, her heart lighter, her soul unburdened. That evening, Camille attended a community event, standing before a packed auditorium. She looked out at the faces before her, men and women, young and old, black and white, all waiting to hear her words. She took a deep breath, her voice carrying through the room. "I stand before you not as a judge, but as a woman who has faced prejudice, who has fought injustice, who has been underestimated and undervalued because of the color of my skin." Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "But I did not fight back with anger. I fought back with truth, with dignity, with justice." The audience sat in silence, captivated by her words. Camille continued, her voice steady, powerful. "Justice isn't about revenge. It isn't about punishment. It's about accountability. It's about truth. It's about redemption." Her gaze swept over the room, her spirit fierce, her resolve unyielding. "And it's about hope. Hope that we can be better. Hope that we can change. Hope that we can heal." The crowd rose to their feet, applause thunderous, tears streaming down faces inspired by her strength, her courage, her truth. Camille stepped back, her heart full, her soul at peace. This was her purpose, her mission, her fight. And she was ready for whatever came next. Late that night, Camille stood on her balcony, looking out over the city. The air was cool, crisp, filled with the hum of life, of hope, of change. Her phone buzzed, a message from Captain Reynolds. "Turner was sentenced today. 5 years. He blamed you until the end. Some people never change. But some do. Thank you for showing us the difference." Camille's chest tightened, a tear slipping down her cheek. She took a deep breath, her heart steady, her spirit unbroken. She looked up at the stars, her voice a whisper. "Thank you for giving me the strength to fight." She closed her eyes, letting the breeze wash over her, carrying away the pain, the anger, the fear. This was her life, her purpose, her legacy. And she would continue to fight for justice, for truth, for hope. Because justice wasn't just about the law. It was about change. It was about redemption. It was about love. And as long as she was Judge Camille Johnson, she would fight for it. Every day, every breath, every heartbeat, no matter what. The story of Camille Johnson wasn't just about one woman's battle against prejudice and injustice. It was about the power of truth, the strength of integrity, and the courage to stand up for what is right. It was about showing the world that justice isn't about revenge or punishment, but about accountability, redemption, and hope. It was about inspiring others to fight for change, to stand against hate, to believe in the power of justice. Camille Johnson became more than a judge. She became a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope. She became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the oppressed. And her fight for justice continued to inspire generations. Because justice, true justice, is eternal. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, if it gave you hope, then join the fight for justice. Speak out against injustice. Stand up for truth. Fight for equality. Because the fight for justice never ends. And neither does our courage. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, truth, and hope. Share this video to inspire others to stand up for justice. And remember, justice isn't just about the law. It's about change. It's about hope. It's about us. Thank you for watching.